Welcome to the deep dive. Here we really try to cut through all the noise, pull back the curtain on the big global shift so you get a clear, comprehensive understanding of what's really going on. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a relationship that's, well, quietly, but pretty profoundly reshaping things. The partnership between Russia and Iran. It's complex, it's evolving fast. We've sifted through a whole stack of the latest analysis, the reports, and our mission really is to get beyond the headlines. We want to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, give you a shortcut, so to speak, to being genuinely well-informed about this alliance. Because it is pivotal. We'll try to uncover some surprising facts, maybe add just enough context to, keep you hooked. And look, this isn't just about two countries somewhere else on the map. It's about understanding the ripple effects, the politics, the economics, global security, and what these shifts really mean for your perspective on the world. So yeah, it's time to unpack this.
Absolutely. And, for decades, the way Russia and Iran interacted, it was always this fascinating, often contradictory mix. Think about it. You had moments of cautious cooperation, then periods of outright competition, and often underneath it all, this kind of pervasive suspicion, deep historical roots there. But what the material we've reviewed really shows that something fundamental, something truly profound has shifted, especially, in the last few years. We're clearly moving into a different phase for this partnership. It really demands a closer look, a much more granular one than maybe we've traditionally given it.
That's a really key distinction. Okay, so let's start with that big picture, the overarching story. Because the info we have points to a decade of really significant change here. It's described as having considerable dynamism, and that energy, that dynamism, have only picked up speed, right? Especially since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Historically, if you think back, it was always this mix of cooperation, competition, and suspicion. You always had those three elements kind of swirling around. But actually, even back in the early 1990s, you started seeing the first signs of things improving. A thaw, maybe. And by the mid-2010s, we were already seeing what's called a more varied baseline for how they dealt with each other. This baseline was particularly interesting because it showed growing cooperation in military affairs and, well, at least a moderate alignment of economic interests. So it hinted at what might come, but the real acceleration, that was still down the road.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is how that baseline, which was already showing more cooperation, then just went into overdrive after the Ukraine war started. The relationship really pivoted. It went from what was mostly, cautious engagement to much fuller collaboration across a range of dimensions. And the insights we've gathered, they're pretty clear on what drove this acceleration. The main push, the major impetus has undeniably been the war in Ukraine, which of course built on their earlier shared experience in the Syrian conflict. And then you add the crushing effect of all those Western sanctions hitting both Russia and Iran. It's like this perfect storm of external pressures that just lowered a lot of the old barriers Moscow had about engaging too closely with Tehran. Things like worries about Iran's nuclear program or the threat of secondary sanctions from the West. Those used to hold Moscow back. But now, with Russia itself under heavy sanctions, those concerns just don't carry the same weight. I mean, Moscow is still careful in some areas, very sensitive ones, but the overall direction, it's clearly towards deeper collaboration. And looking ahead, the analysis suggests the Israel-Hamas war will likely just reinforce this trend of improved bilateral relations, at least in the short to medium term. So it's not just some temporary tactical thing born out of immediate need. The thinking is that this relationship has moved beyond mere transactionalism, beyond just one-off deals. It's genuinely evolving into a sustained partnership, something that could really stick around, medium to long term, and shape things globally for years. That signals a pretty fundamental shift in how they both see the world and their place in it.
That's a crucial insight. It suggests we're not just looking at a temporary alliance of convenience, but maybe something more lasting, almost like forced geopolitical evolution, where outside pressures have kind of cemented a bond that might otherwise have stayed, well, ambivalent. So what exactly are the forces driving this? Can we break them down into those push versus pull factors analysts talk about? What external things push them together and what internal stuff pulled them closer?
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. And the distinction is really helpful. So on the push side, these are the external needs, the things that require cooperation. The main push factors are pretty unequivocally mutual support in sanctions evasion. They both need ways around Western economic pressure and this shared need for advanced military technology and arms transfers. For Russia, that means getting hold of things like affordable drones and artillery shells, which it desperately needs for the war. For Iran, it's about finally getting modern fighter jets, maybe better air defense systems, stuff it couldn't really get elsewhere because of sanctions and embargoes. These are direct, immediate consequences of fighting a long war and dealing with these really tough new Western sanctions that have basically cut them both off from a lot of the global economy. Okay, then you have the pull factors. These are more the internal motivations drawing them closer together. This includes, pretty obviously, both countries' interest in reducing their international isolation. They both want to push back against Western efforts to make them pariahs. And importantly, there's this growing ideological alignment.
Ah, that part.
Yeah, this last point is really interesting, I think. It points to something maybe deeper, more organic, motivating them. It's rooted in this shared view of a multipolar world, a resistance to what they see as Western dominance or hegemony.
Hmm.
It's a profound kind of common ground that goes beyond just immediate military or economic needs. It provides a narrative, a justification.
That ideological thread is compelling. It adds this layer beyond just, pure opportunism. But even with all these powerful forces pushing and pulling them, are there still lingering constraints, things holding the partnership back? You'd think old grudges or competing interests wouldn't just disappear overnight.
No, you're absolutely right. They haven't disappeared. While they're less dominant now, constraints definitely still exist. They remind us this isn't some perfectly smooth, friction-free alliance. First, there's the historical baggage, specifically the history of Moscow's occupation of Iranian territory.
Going way back.
Exactly. Historical Russian interventions, occupations, particularly in northern Iran, 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, this history just breeds this underlying suspicion, a deep-seated Iranian concern about sovereignty, about territorial integrity. It means Tehran always approaches Moscow with a degree of caution, always kind of looking over its shoulder at those historical precedents. Then there's the practical stuff. Dissatisfaction with the quality and provision of Russian military technology on Iran's side.
Ah, the reliability issue.
And yeah, lingering questions about Russia's reliability as a partner. Iran has complained in the past about delays, about equipment not performing as expected. So this has historically made Iran wary, about becoming too dependent on Russia for its defense. There's also Iran's own very ingrained concern over maintaining a non-aligned foreign policy. That sometimes puts the brakes on how far they'll go with Russia, especially in formal alliances. Tehran often sees itself as a leader, of the global south,
Yep.
and doesn't want to look like it's just following Moscow's lead. And of course, Russia itself has its own complex balancing act to perform.
In the Middle East, yeah.
Right. It needs to balance ties with other Middle Eastern states, especially Saudi Arabia, but also others in the Caspian Sea basin. Riyadh, for instance, is hugely important in OPEC plus C, where Russia has its own interests. And countries around the Caspian, like Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, they're sensitive to Iranian influence, and Russia has security and economic ties there too. So Moscow can't just go all in with Iran without risking upsetting these other key players, potentially jeopardizing its broader strategy. So yeah, the relationships deepen, but these are real tangible things that still create friction, still limit just how far the alignment can go.
That's a really helpful map of the terrain, actually, highlighting both the huge forces pulling them together and those, maybe more subtle, but still persistent, friction points. Okay, so as we continue this deep dive, we'll break this down further. We'll look at it through three key dimensions, just like our sources lay out: political, military, and economic. And we'll show you how the specific details, the indicators in each area, paint this really clear, evolving picture. Let's turn to the political landscape first, because this is where you see the most visible signs of this growing alignment. Lots of very public signals being sent. Political ties, as the analysis defines them, cover a wide range of diplomatic chats, aligning policies, those high-level meetings between elites, and just this broader shift towards a cooperative strategic view. Now, while there's been a definite sharp uptick in engagement since the Ukraine war started, it's important to remember that this positive dynamic actually began much earlier. Think back. Their cooperation in Syria from 2015, the fallout from the U.S. pulling out of the JCPOA nuclear deal in 2018, which isolated Iran more, and then the UN arms embargo on Iran ending in 2020. These things sort of paved the way. What's really striking now, though, is that high-level political elites, rather than just diplomats, are partaking more frequently in regularly scheduled public meetings. This isn't just routine diplomatic stuff anymore. It's much more significant top-level engagement. It signals intent right from the very top.
And what's really fascinating here is how this political deepening is reflected in, well, the power of their shared language, their rhetoric. We've seen this growing alignment in political discourse from both sides. There are these new emphases on a civilizationist turn in global politics.
Civilization.
World, meaning essentially a worldview where distinct civilizations rather than just nation states are the main actors, often framed implicitly or explicitly against a perceived Western-led global order. They frequently talk positively about the global south, or what the Russians often call the world majority, positioning it as this anti-Western bulwark. This isn't just talk, it's a deliberate strategy to build solidarity among nations feeling, marginalized by Western dominance. And there's also real coordination on promoting traditional values and cultural specificity. This is a direct counter-narrative to what they portray as Western liberalism, Western universalism. To give you a real sense of this rhetorical alignment, listen to Russian Press Secretary Maria Zakharova. She said, "Since the signing of the current treaty, the international context has changed, and relations between the two countries are experiencing an unprecedented upswing." That's Moscow publicly acknowledging the shift. And Russia's newest foreign policy concept from March 2023. It reinforces this directly. It says the formation of a more equitable multipolar world order is underway, and it specifically stresses cooperation between the states that are subject to external pressure. That's Moscow actively building this narrative of solidarity with sanctioned, isolated nations, Iran obviously being a prime example.
And it goes even deeper, doesn't it? Almost framing it as a defense of their identity. I remember Putin speaking at the World Russian People's Council in November 2023, talking about Russia's multi-ethnic culture as opposed to Western neo-colonialism and imperialism. Yeah. He even made that striking claim that the West has no need for such a large and multi-ethnic country as Russia. That's a powerful stuff, framing Russia's actions as defensive, necessary against a hostile West.
Exactly. And it finds a strong echo in Tehran. Iran has this long-standing illiberal tradition rooted in its Islamic theocratic ideas, broader Islamic civilizationist thinking. It naturally aligns with this multipolar anti-Western narrative. Former Iranian President Raisi, back in January 2022, speaking to the Russian parliament, he highlighted the goal of cooperation to fulfill the common interests of people, as well as to create a global civilized society. He said, "Such cooperation is possible only through implementation and commitment to justice, morality, and spirituality." So the shared rhetorical space, it makes elite statements increasingly coherent and legible for both sides. It effectively justifies this narrative of geopolitical unity through these civilizational blocks. It builds this powerful sense of a common struggle against a perceived external enemy. That ideological glue is a really significant pull factor, like we talked about.
Yeah, that shared worldview, this almost joint ideological front against what they see as Western dominance. It definitely paves the way for more formal stuff, even if the road isn't always perfectly smooth. Let's talk about how they're trying to formalize this. Treaties, memoranda of understanding, that sort of thing. Historically, there was that 2001 treaty on the basis of mutual relations and principles of cooperation, a 20-year deal, right? Covered energy, nuclear, economics, arms deals. Yeah. Explicitly aimed at countering U.S. isolation. That was foundational. But then, fast forward to January 2024, and Presidents Putin and Raisi announced they were working on a new interstate treaty for full strategic cooperation. That sounded huge. Really ambitious, signaling a comprehensive alignment.
It certainly did sound that way. But, and this is crucial, highlighting those lingering complexities came the announcement in June 2024 from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, no less, saying that the process of work on the agreement was suspended. Why? Because of problems with Iranian partners and amendments from the Iranian side.
Ah, so hiccups.
Big hiccups. Now, Russia still publicly calls it a strategic decision, suggesting they still intend to do it eventually. But this suspension, it really signals that even at the highest levels, there are internal disagreements, maybe frictions on the Iranian side, that can temporarily throw even the most ambitious plans off track. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? Even deeply aligned partners bound by shared needs still have their own domestic politics, their own national interests that can create friction. It's never a perfectly straight line.
Right, so not a completely smooth path to full strategic cooperation. But despite that pause on the big new treaty, the sources mention a considerable uptick in these Memoranda of Understanding MOUs since the war, most signed in 2023. Now, these aren't full treaties, but they lay practical groundwork across a whole range of areas: military, technical, economic ties. We've seen examples. 19 MOUs signed just in February 2024, covering oil, gas, automakers, airlines, Pretty diverse. And remember, Gazprom's massive $40 billion investment memorandum back in July 2022, that points to serious future energy collaboration. Plus, on trade, they pushed through that free trade agreement with the Russia-backed Eurasian Economic Union in December 2023. Even their Security Council signed an MOU in April 2024 on security matters. These aren't just symbolic handshakes, they're documents formalizing practical cooperation.
And this leads us nicely into broader security alignments, specifically Iran's engagement with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, versus its continued absence from the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the CSTO. Iran became a full member of the SCO in 2023, and the SCO is this major regional geopolitical and economic bloc led by Russia and China.
Okay, so joining SKO is significant.
Hugely significant.
Yeah.
Because the SCO gives Iran this important venue for institutional ties, diplomatic links, connections between elites. It effectively integrates Iran into a major Eurasian security and economic structure that explicitly positions itself as an alternative to Western-led groups. It gives Iran a formal seat at a powerful table, boosts its international standing, gives it more options for cooperation outside the Western orbit. However, it's just as interesting that Iran has not joined the Russia-led CSTO, even though they were invited back in 2007.
Why not, if they're getting so close to Russia?
Well, the analysis suggests it's likely down to Tehran's concern about making multilateral mutual defense commitments. Iran seems to see that as just too risky. Unlike the SCO, the CSTO is a proper military alliance. It has mutual defense clauses like NATO's Article 5. Iran, despite its deepening ties with Russia, seems wary of signing up to a formal defense pact that could automatically drag it into conflicts, especially Russian conflicts that aren't directly tied to Iran's own core security interests. So while it's happy to join broader security and economic groups, it seems hesitant to fully commit to a military alliance that might compromise its strategic autonomy or pull it into unwanted wars. That's a really key distinction in its foreign policy approach.
That's a critical nuance, definitely. Okay, beyond the formal agreements, let's talk about the actual face-to-face stuff, the interactive engagements, because our sources highlight a big increase in the tempo of political engagements between Russian and Iranian elites since the war began. And it's not just how often they're meeting, but who is meeting, the seniority, the importance of the officials involved. We're talking at least 21 high-level official meetings just between 2021 and 2024, with the biggest jump happening in 2023. And remember, that highly symbolic moment, Putin's very first trip abroad after the full-scale invasion. It was to Iran in July 2022. These aren't low-level folks. We're consistently seeing presidents, parliamentary speakers, key ministers, military chiefs of staff, defense ministers, heads of security councils, all directly involved. It shows they mean business right at the top.
And this leads to something potentially of special interest, the increasing contact between their security councils. Think about what these bodies do. Russia's Security Council isn't just advisory, it's a key decision-influencing body directly linked to the president. Historically, figures like Patrushev, now Shoigu, they hold immense power there, shaping major policy, coordinating national security. It's arguably the core security institution in Russia besides the presidency itself. And similarly, Iran's Supreme National Security Council, the SNSC, it's the principal forum and clearinghouse for defense and security coordination. It brings together top officials from government, the military, including the powerful IRGC. Now, while the Iranian president isn't the ultimate authority, that's the supreme leader, with informal advisors in the IRGC holding huge sway, the point is, deeper and regular connections between the two security councils would still imply a considerable institutionalization of the political and security relationship at the highest levels. This suggests something more systemic, not just opportunistic. It's like a fundamental alignment of their core security machines.
Okay, let's switch gears now to the military dimension. Arguably the most tangible, most immediate aspect of this partnership right now. Historically, as you mentioned, military cooperation goes way back, 1967 even. We saw big moments like that 1989 arms deal, MiG-29s, Su-24s for Iran, advanced stuff for its time. But the relationship military-wise has had serious ups and downs, periods of real frustration. In the Yeltsin and early Putin years, yeah, sales increased early 2000s, but there was considerable dissatisfaction in Iran. Quality issues with Russian tech, problems with agreements being honored. Remember the whole saga with the S-300 missile system. Russia backed out in 2007, citing UN embargoes, then finally delivered them nearly a decade later, 2016. That builds mistrust, right? And even before the Ukraine war, Iran often had to rely heavily on its own domestic defense industry, partly because foreign suppliers were unreliable, partly because of decades of sanctions. There was even that leaked interview with Zarif, the former Iranian foreign minister, in 2021. He openly blamed Russia for trying to sabotage nuclear talks with the West and for basically pushing Iran deeper into Syria. So, yeah, this wasn't always some smooth, trusting military partnership, often very transactional, lots of friction.
That historical context is absolutely vital because it really underscores the profound transformation we've witnessed since 2022. Those past hesitations, those frustrations, they've largely been swept aside by the urgent demands of the Ukraine war. What we're seeing now is a deep surge in military cooperation. There's been this series of high-level exchanges between top military and security people, signaling real strategic alignment. For instance, IRGC Rear Admiral Amadian, who heads Iran's SNSC, met with Patrushev, then head of Russia's Security Council, in January 2024. They talked about everything: cybersecurity, economic security, counterterrorism, a broad strategic convergence. Patrushev himself said publicly that relations between Russia and Iran continue to strengthen, reaching a qualitatively new level across the whole range of areas. And then in September 2023, Russian Defense Minister Shoigu made that highly publicized visit to Tehran. He toured Iranian missile and drone displays, a very clear signal of Moscow's interest in their tech. He met top Iranian military leaders, and crucially, Shoigu called Iran Russia's strategic partner. That's a significant rhetorical upgrade. Yet, and this is where it gets fascinating again, despite all this high-level back and forth, these overt displays, there's this persistent contrast. Iran has been consistently reluctant to publicly admit shipping drones to Russia, and apparently faces some domestic opposition to getting involved in Ukraine. And maybe most telling, Iran has never formally recognized Russia's annexation of Crimea or the territories in eastern Ukraine.
Still holding that line.
Exactly. It suggests that while the cooperation is deep and pragmatic, there are still lines Iran won't cross publicly or legally, maintaining a degree of diplomatic distance on the really sensitive stuff.
That tension between public denial and deep practical cooperation is interesting. But then, on the other hand, you have Supreme Leader Khamenei, Iran's top authority, publicly telling Putin in July 2022, and I'm quoting here, "Concerning Ukraine, if you had not taken the initiative, the other side would have done so and initiated a war." That's an incredibly strong public statement of support, almost an ideological blessing for Russia's actions.
It is. It powerfully shows that high-level ideological alignment, that shared narrative we talked about, even if there are tactical hesitations about public admissions. And beyond the rhetoric, we've seen tangible things, like an increase in naval port calls over the last 3 years. These are often tied to joint naval exercises. Now, these exercises might be limited compared to major navies, but they're important symbols. They show growing operational comfort, share strategic goals, especially in places like the Caspian Sea and the Gulf.
And it's not just about meetings or symbols. It's about real, practical, combined operations, tested in actual conflict zones. Syria, starting back in 2011, but with major Russian involvement from 2015. It really was a turning point, wasn't it? It led to considerably closer military-to-military ties. Russia provided the crucial air power, hitting targets from above, while Iran supplied drones and deployed its IRGC-commanded militias on the ground. They were key in the ground fighting. They even set up that joint intelligence sharing center in Baghdad in 2015. That points to pretty sophisticated coordination, going beyond just fighting in parallel. And beyond direct state involvement, the material details Russian support for proxies, which has huge implications across the Middle East. For instance, the U.S. Treasury back in 2018 accused Russia of being directly involved in smuggling oil to Syria, with the money specifically benefiting Hezbollah through cash payments. That's not just indirect support, that's a direct financial pipeline. A Hezbollah delegation even visited Russia in 2021, deepening those direct links. And more recently, November 2023, reports surfaced that Hezbollah got hold of Russian Yakont anti-ship missiles. Originally sold to Syria, but now in Hezbollah's hands, significantly boosting their ability to threaten ships. There are even U.S. intelligence reports hinting at a potential transfer of SA-22 air defense systems via the Wagner Group, which, despite its complicated status, still has ties to Russian state interests. And this alignment stretches to groups like Hamas, too. Russia notably refuses to label Hamas a terrorist group, a big difference from Western policy. Hamas officials have visited Moscow repeatedly since 2006 and again in March 2023. That shows ongoing engagement, a degree of legitimacy given by Moscow. There are even reports, though perhaps murkier, of Russian cryptocurrency exchanges helping with Hamas financing. It points to this broader, sometimes indirect military and financial alignment in the region that definitely challenges Western interests.
Which brings us to the absolutely crucial role of arms sales. This has profoundly reshaped the military dynamic between them, and frankly, the wider conflict landscape. Despite Iran's consistent denials, it has, without doubt, been an important source of weapons and training for Russia's war in Ukraine. We're talking about Iran selling its drones, the Shahed 131, which Russia calls Jaran 1, the Shahed 136 or Jaran 2, and the Mohajer 6 UAVs. Estimates suggest as many as 1,700 of these drones have been sold. And the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, did detailed analysis confirming they're Iranian, comparing wreckage found in Ukraine to drones used elsewhere in the Middle East. There's really little room for doubt. Now, here's where it gets really interesting and signals a much deeper long-term commitment: co-production.
Building them in Russia itself?
Exactly. There are concrete plans, ambitious ones, to produce maybe 6,000 Shahed 136 drones by 2025 at this huge facility in Tatarstan, Russia. It's reportedly part of a $1 billion deal. This initiative, which provided a significant boost to Russian capabilities, apparently started co-production in January 2023, and the goal is to get to 80% localized production. This isn't just about getting more drones, it signals Russia's long-term plan for self-sufficiency in drone warfare, reducing reliance on outside suppliers. And it shows how sanctions are forcing these fundamental shifts in military industries. And it's not only drones. Russia is very interested in getting Iranian ballistic missiles, specifically the Fatehar 110 and the Zolfagar. These have the range to hit targets anywhere in Ukraine. Now, UN controls on Iranian missile exports officially expired in October 2023, removing some legal hurdles. U.S. officials kept warning an imminent deal was coming. And then, in September 2024, the U.S. confirmed it. Iran had shipped Fateh 360 short-range ballistic missiles to Russia, so that transfer has begun. Plus, Iran shipped huge amounts of ammunition, up to 1 million rounds and 300,000 artillery shells via the Caspian Sea between late 2022 and spring 2023. Critical resupply for Russia. And our insights suggest Iran is charging a premium price for all this, turning wartime necessity into a nice little earner.
So definitely a high-stakes, two-way street on arms transfers. What about the other way, Russian arms to Iran? How's Tehran benefiting, especially now the UN arms embargo is gone?
Right, post-2020, with that embargo lifted, Tehran's been eager to modernize its pretty old military, especially its air force. Our sources confirm Iran got its first 2 Russian-made Yak-130 jet trainers in September 2023. Now, these aren't just trainers. They can do light attack, and they help pilots transition to more advanced jets. And there are concrete plans for Iran to get 24 Su-35 fighter aircraft. These are highly capable multi-role jets and Mi-28 attack helicopters. Reports suggest these Su-35s are basically being traded for Iranian drones. A direct quid pro quo. Iranian drones are literally paying for advanced Russian jets.
Wow, barter at the highest levels.
Essentially. And looking ahead, Iran is showing strong interest in Russian ships for its navy. And crucially, Russia might even help Iran with its long-range missile program, maybe providing advanced tech like components or expertise from the S-400 air defense system. That would significantly boost Iran's own missile capabilities and air defenses, further shifting regional power balances.
That's a lot of serious hardware changing hands, with huge implications. But how is this trade even happening, with both countries under such heavy sanctions? Our sources point to this crucial and kind of shadowy practice, covert maritime trade, specifically these dark port calls, meaning vessels deliberately turn off their AI's tracking signals, automatic identification system in sensitive areas like the Caspian Sea to hide weapons trade. And this isn't just speculation. Lloyd's List Intelligence, a top maritime data firm, spotted a clear spike in these tracking data gaps back in September 2022, especially near key Iranian and Russian ports like Astrakhan. It suggests a deliberate pattern. The Volga-Don Canal connecting the Caspian to the Black Sea saw a massive 42% jump in shipping traffic in 2022. It's become a critical route for this trade. The U.S. National Security Council even put out a map detailing drone transit routes via the Caspian. And Lloyd's data showed nearly 4 times as many gaps in AIs used on Russian-flagged ships in 2023 compared to the prior year. That's undeniable proof of a huge increase in this illicit shadow trade, vital for bypassing sanctions and global monitoring.
And beyond the big arms deals and logistics, other military cooperation is maybe more limited in scope, but it's definitely growing in sophistication. Take basing and access. That controversial 2016 deal for Russia to use Iran's Noja air base for Syria missions, it was very brief, just a few days, fell apart due to strong Iranian constitutional worries about foreign troops on their soil. Now, there's no new evidence of Russia getting permanent bases in Iran today, but there is speculation, based on various reports, that maybe Iranian planes are using the Russian-controlled Hymyim airport in Syria, perhaps for transport, logistics, a subtle kind of cooperation. In terms of logistics arrangements, Iranian ships got permission to use the Volga River in October 2022. That was previously off limits to foreign vessels, so it really helps cargo movement. And that landmark agreement in May 2023 to finish the Rasht-Astara rail line by 2027. That's huge. It's a key part of the International North-South Transport Corridor, the INSTC, directly linking Russia to the Indian Ocean via Iran. Now, its completion depends on Russian money, but its strategic importance for long-term trade, bypassing Western routes, cannot be overstated. Then there's training. We've seen concrete examples. Iranian drone experts sent to Russia's Alabuga plant for that co-production effort. Crucially, an IRGC contingent was sent to Crimea in October 2022 to help Russian troops operate the new Iranian UAVs, apparently because the Russians were having technical difficulties.
So direct hands-on help.
Exactly. Direct operational collaboration, knowledge transfer. And Iranian pilots are actively training in Russia on the Su-35s, getting ready for delivery, and intelligence sharing. Beyond that joint center in Baghdad from 2015, there's more recent bilateral cooperation on counterintelligence. Since 2021, Russia has apparently provided Iran with surveillance equipment and censorship and lie detector technology for use against domestic opponents.
Oof. The darker side of cooperation.
Indeed. Plus, they signed a cybersecurity agreement in 2021 for broader intel exchange. These smaller technical collaborations, they show a quiet but profound deepening, even if full, overt military integration isn't the goal right now.
Okay, let's shift now to the economic dimension. Historically, this has been, maybe surprisingly, a weak link in the Russia-Iran relationship, especially compared to their military or political ties. Our sources consistently describe the past as one of hesitant cooperation, even Russian withdrawal from projects because of that constant threat of U.S. sanctions. It's fair to say their economic relationship just never evolved into meaningful interactions on a really big scale. Even the intense military coordination in Syria that did not translate into a stronger economic relationship. Remember, when JCPOA sanctions were briefly lifted in 2015, trade did pick up a bit. But then Trump reinstated sanctions in 2018, maximum pressure, and Russia back then quickly pulled back from potential deals. It's clear Western policy, especially sanctions, really significantly shaped how they engaged economically, mostly by holding it back. And internally, they always had issues like poorly developed transit infrastructure and that natural competition for markets, especially in key areas like oil and gas. These acted as built-in brakes, stopping any strong economic bond from really forming.
That history is absolutely key, because the post-2022 transformation has just unequivocally served as a turning point. The fundamental change in their economic thinking is driven by three main things, all linked. First, and maybe most importantly, U.S. economic statecraft no longer deters Russian officials or Russian businesses from investing in and engaging with the Iranian economy. Why? Because many Russians already face severe sanctions and see little left to fear.
They figure, what more can the West do?
Pretty much. Russia's already absorbed the worst of it. Its economy largely reoriented away from the West, so dealing with Iran, it carries very little extra risk now. The whole calculation is flipped. Second, Russia urgently needed new economic partners. It lost huge access to European markets, historically its main customers. Iran, already isolated and looking for lifelines, was a willing, available partner of necessity. Third, the Ukraine war has basically cemented Russia's pivot to Asia. This is a long-term strategic shift, and in this new vision, Iran is now seen as a key part of that vision. Why? Because it provides easier and cost-effective access to Indian and Asian markets. So this isn't just about dodging sanctions, it's a long-term strategic play, building new trade routes, new economic spheres independent of the West. It's also worth noting, the internal Iranian dynamics. While the hardliners are mostly pro-Russia, moderates in Iran do worry a bit about getting dragged into a quagmire or becoming too dependent. But the hardliners are dominant right now, which means Iran is increasingly pursuing a closer economic relationship. And even President Raisi's recent death is seen as unlikely to derail this overall trend. The strategic direction seems set at a higher level.
So really fundamental shift in thinking on both sides. Driven by need, yes, but also this shared strategic vision. And you can see this reflected in the coordination. The institutional links they're actively building now. We're seeing both bilateral and multilateral economic groups being used in new ways. Iran getting invited into BRICS in 2023, for instance, that group with Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, plus new members. That gives Iran a crucial new stage to expand economic engagement and, importantly, helps it surmount its status as an international outcast. A big step towards global reintegration for Tehran and its full membership in the SKO in 2023. That further links it with major Central Asian economies, publicly aligning Tehran with what many see as that Russia-China axis in this emerging multipolar world. Beyond the big bloc, there's also been this notable increase in specific leader meetings, economic ministers from both countries getting together. It signals a real hands-on approach to solving problems. We've seen transport ministers meeting in April 2022 on logistics, ICT ministers in November 2022 on digital stuff, central bank governors in 2023 tackling financial mechanisms. These frequent high-level meetings, they highlight the growing high-level engagement aimed at really solidifying and streamlining their economic partnership, often trying to bypass those traditional Western systems.
And this push for coordination goes right into banking and currency. A key part of their efforts to de-dollarize, right, to insulate themselves from Western financial leverage. They set up a real ruble exchange back in August 2022. Allows direct currency swaps without needing dollars. Then they directly connected their banks in January 2023, an interbanking agreement, using their own national financial messaging systems to basically bypass SWIFT, the global system the West can use for sanctions. By May 2023, the data showed about 80% of Russia-Iran settlements were conducted via national currencies. That's a huge step towards financial independence. It lets them trade, invest without direct Western oversight. But it's crucial to admit the significant limits that still exist here.
It's not all smooth sailing.
No, definitely not. There's this persistent lack of liquidity in rublarial foreign exchange markets, meaning it's hard to swap large amounts of one currency for the other without messing up the exchange rate. Plus, there's high volatility in their bilateral exchange rates. Makes long-term planning, stable trade deals really tricky. And Iran itself has no single exchange rate. Multiple official, unofficial rates. It seriously complicates cross-border deals, adds uncertainty. The Chinese renminbi theoretically could offer a more stable alternative. But China's been hesitant to engage with Iran too deeply, worried about U.S. secondary sanctions. So that option is limited for now. These are real practical hurdles to their big ambitions.
Despite those banking challenges and the, well, ambitious goals, trade is clearly growing, though maybe still limited overall. Let's look at free trade agreements. Iran and the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, the EU, signed a new free trade deal in December 2023. The Russian Duma ratified it in May 2024. This comprehensive deal, expected to kick in early 2025, aims to eliminate customs duties on roughly 90% of traded goods. Should make bilateral trade much cheaper. And this replaces a temporary deal from 2019 that already saw trade jump significantly from about $2.4 billion in 2019 to $6.2 billion in 2022. So definitely an upward trend. As for the total bilateral trade value before 2022, it was hovering around a modest $1.5 billion a year, mostly food, basic stuff, described as limited trade involving distributed supply chains. But post-2022, unquestionably a turning point, officials on both sides claim $5 billion in total trade by the end of 2022, and this is backed up by that big 120% increase in container shipping in the Caspian Sea compared to 2021. Shows real cargo moving. Interestingly, in 2022, Russia actually imported more industrial goods from Iran than Iran purchased from Russia. Things like auto parts, gas turbines, aircraft materials. It signals Iran's new role as an industrial supplier. And crucially, as we discussed, Iran is adopting the new role of arms supplier to Russia. That fundamentally changes the trade balance. Let's keep perspective. These are still relatively small trade figures overall. Compared to Iran's non-oil trade with China, $15.8 billion in 2022, or the huge Russia-China trade, $176.4 billion in 2022. Despite this, both countries have publicly stated this really ambitious goal, probably unrealistic, to boost non-military bilateral trade to $40 billion a year. Given where they started and the current constraints, that's a very aspirational target.
Now, looking at investments in strategic sectors, there's been a remarkable shift. Russia actually became Iran's largest investor in 2022. They poured in a substantial $2.76 billion between March 2022 and March 2023. That absolutely dwarfs China's investment, only $131 million in the same period. It really shows Russia's new economic commitment. However, it's important to remember the war in Ukraine still limits Russia's overall ability to invest abroad. And Iran still faces challenges like lack of good market info, not enough trade consultants for potential Russian investors, makes the whole process less efficient. But opportunities are being explored. Joint ventures in areas like mechanical engineering, aircraft building, shipbuilding, agriculture, pharmaceuticals. As for Russian loans to Iran, historically they've been inconsistent or outright terminated because of U.S. sanctions. Russia promised $5 billion back in 2015, gave $2.5 billion in 2016, but the current war has not led to a recent surge in big Russian loans to Iran. This suggests maybe a change in how financial support works now, more towards direct investments, specific project financing, often in exchange for goods or services rather than those big traditional government loans. It's probably a more pragmatic, less risky way for Moscow, given its own economic pressures.
Okay, let's really dig into how they're working together in strategic sectors now. Because this is where we see that notable pivot from past competition to, well, surprising collaboration. In communications, Russia showed interest back in November 2022 in developing telecom infrastructure in Iran. Sees a potential new market, a chance to integrate their digital worlds. But this relies heavily on getting hold of goods that are themselves under sanctions. So that's a persistent challenge. Still, the new FTA might open more doors there. Infrastructure is another huge focus, especially transit and transportation. Russia now sees a greater imperative to access those Asian markets via Iran, now that European routes are largely blocked. Iran, of course, benefits hugely by becoming this key transit hub. This has put intense new focus on the International North-South Transport Corridor, the INSTC, launched way back in 2000 by Russia, Iran, and India. It's this mix of land, sea, rail routes meant to shorten trade journeys. There's a renewed push since September 2022 to dramatically boost cargo volume from 8 million tons to 30 million tons by 2030, a really ambitious goal, and a tangible sign. Russia's signing that big $1.7 billion deal in May 2023 to pay for building the crucial Rasht-Astara railway link. This railway, hopefully done by 2027, is predicted to cut transit times in half compared to using the Suez Canal. That could fundamentally remap global trade flows if it works.
And it's a big, but this huge project faces very real challenge and needs maybe $26 billion more investment. Neither country can easily cough that up alone. There are technical problems too. Different track gauges on railways requiring costly transfers, customs controls, harmonizing rules across multiple borders, big logistical headaches. Plus, regional competitors. China's Belt and Road, alternative routes through Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, they're all vying for similar trade. That could affect INSTC's viability. And let's not forget security threats. Terrorism along parts of the route could scare off investors and users. So strategically vital, yes. But actually making it happen faces considerable practical roadblocks. Now, in the absolutely critical oil and gas sector, traditionally Russia and Iran were fierce competitors, especially for European markets, both major energy producers, always vying for market share. But post-2022, a profound shift. Russia is no longer concerned about Iranian competition for European markets because it basically lost that market anyway due to sanctions. So now they are unequivocally pivoting from competitors to collaborators, a remarkable strategic U-turn. You see this clearly in a flurry of energy swap deals and significantly increased Russian investment in Iran's energy sector. Take Gazprom, Russia's energy giant. Plans to invest a staggering $40 billion in Iranian energy projects, announced July 2022, developing oil and gas fields, pipelines like the huge North Pars gas field. However, even here in this collaboration, the power dynamics are clear. A recent 20-year deal apparently grants Russia right of first extraction from the Caspian Sea resources, and pricing for manufactured goods, including energy hardware, seems to heavily favor Moscow. Wow. It suggests Russia, despite needing partners now, still remains largely the senior partner in this vital sector, using its tech and market clout.
That's a massive shift in a traditionally rivalrous sector, turning competitors into, well, interdependent partners. And in aerospace, civilian cooperation's been hampered by sanctions. Remember that failed Sukhoi Superjet deal? But the big focus now is that joint drone factory in Russia. That $1 billion deal, started early 2023, is all about producing Iranian-designed drones on Russian soil. Gives Russia a critical wartime capability, bypasses supply chains, and cements Iran's role as a key military-industrial supplier.
And finally, nuclear energy. Russia has actually increased its cooperation with Iran's civilian nuclear program, primarily at the Bushehr nuclear power plant. Moscow delivered nuclear fuel back in June 2017 and is actively helping build 2 more reactors at Bushehr. Iran publicly said in 2022 it was ready to expand cooperation in peaceful nuclear energy. It indicates a shared commitment in this very sensitive area, moving past old frictions and sanction-related pauses. This cooperation gives Iran vital technical help and materials for its civilian program.
Wow, okay. It's clear this relationship is incredibly multifaceted, dynamic, and maybe surprisingly, quite resilient. So, bringing it all together, what our deep dive shows is that despite that lingering mistrust, historical baggage, occasional friction, a sharp break between Russia and Iran in the short to medium term is unlikely. The urgent need of the Russian military for Iranian drones and ammo, driven by the Ukraine war, has created this almost indispensable link. It will ensure that Russia's political leadership keeps relations with Iran on track. There's a compelling instrumental strategic logic driving this, fueled by immediate war needs and that longer-term geopolitical shift. On the military side, yeah, the high-level meetings, the big arms sales both ways, those shady dark port calls. It all undeniably signals a notable improvement in their defense relationship, far beyond anything we saw before. Yet, as we discussed, limits are still there. Iran's worries about sovereignty, foreign bases, differing interests sometimes in places like Syria, ongoing quality issues with some tech. Even their joint military exercises often seem more about political messaging, showing solidarity, than about deep integrated operations. Suggests a pragmatic partnership, not a fully fused alliance. And economically, the war has just fundamentally altered each country's strategic calculus, truly pivoting them from often tense competitors to increasingly collaborative partners. There are now strong mutual incentives for deeper economic ties, driven by sanctions, yes, but also this shared desire for economic independence from the West. And both sides are investing heavily in this shift, big infrastructure projects, de-dollarization efforts.
As we try to make sense of this changing landscape, it's vital to remember Russia's tricky Middle East balancing act. It must continue to balance its interest in deepening the Russia-Iran relationship with managing stable relations with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Israel. Always a tightrope for Moscow. However, our insights suggest Russia has grown more comfortable with not taking a fully pro-Israel position lately, especially since the latest Israel-Hamas conflict. That actually eases some of the old constraints it felt, allows a deeper embrace of Iran without maybe alienating all its other regional partners quite as much. It's also absolutely crucial to grasp the Axis question properly. Our analysis really emphasizes that political engagement between Russia and Iran does not necessarily mean trilateral engagement or coordination with China.
Right, not necessarily a unified bloc.
Exactly. While they might share anti-Western feelings, participate in forums like SKO, it's better described as a series of interlocking but separate bilateral relationships. Each country still has its own distinct goals. There's overlap, sure, but it's not some single united axis acting as one. Policymakers should be careful not to assume it is. Furthermore, the effectiveness of sanctions clearly diminished in this context. U.S. economic statecraft no longer deters Russian officials or Russian businesses from investing in and engaging with the Iranian economy. Because, as we said, many Russians already face severe sanctions and see little left to fear. The additional risk is seen as minimal. China also plays this pivotal kind of dual role. It can be an enabling factor or a constraint. Right now, China seems wary of going all in with Iran, worried about U.S. secondary sanctions. But if conditions change, if Beijing decides the strategic benefits outweigh the risks, China could provide vital banking, investment infrastructure that would massively boost the Russia-Iran economic link. But even then, Iran-China relations have their own complexities, their own friction points. Finally, while Iranian domestic politics, that tension between hardliners and moderates is undoubtedly a major constraint on how deep this partnership can truly go, our analysis suggests there's little chance of any leadership change in the short to medium term that would fundamentally reverse this pro-Russia direction. And despite the long-term vision, the big investments in things like INSTC, there's still a fundamental lack of compatibility between the two economies. Both often produce similar raw materials, compete for certain markets. These factors, plus wider geopolitics, could constrain Russian and Iranian abilities to make the bilateral economic relationship last for decades to come, as a truly robust, self-sustaining partnership beyond immediate need. It's a powerful bond, yes, but still one born more of circumstance than perfect economic synergy.
So we've taken a really detailed journey, haven't we? Through the political, the military, the economic dimensions of this complex, often contradictory but undeniably evolving Russia-Iran relationship. We really hope this deep dive has given you a more nuanced, multi-layered understanding of what's happening here. A critical global dynamic going far beyond what you usually get from the headlines.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Considering Russia's history as a huge energy supplier to Europe and Iran's vast, mostly untapped energy reserves, what's surprising, maybe even ironic, long-term consequence might this deepening, yet still somewhat constrained, Russia-Iran partnership have for the global energy market? Beyond just their current collaboration or competition, could it perhaps indirectly end up accelerating a global shift away from reliance on both of their energy supplies in the long run? Something to think about.
A truly fascinating question to ponder. We definitely encourage you to keep thinking about these complex global shifts, how interconnected these seemingly distant events really are, reshaping not just alliances but fundamental market dynamics. Until next time, keep digging deeper.